Well, folks, welcome back to Performance Process. I am your host, Ronan McLaughlin. Thanks for tuning in once again. We're shaking things up a little bit this week. We're in the middle of the Classics season. I am at the Classics, covering some of the tech that we're seeing there. And as such, we're going to look back over the next couple of weeks at some of the highlight episodes that we've had over the past 2 years or so of this show. Today's episode is with Matthew Hybor, the head of performance at Visma Lease Bike. We first recorded this show back in, I think, October 2023, and we're rerunning it again today, just simply because it is a fascinating listen, gives us a bit of an insight into how that team has turned itself around from sort of an also-ran about a decade ago to obviously the powerhouse that it is today. So, without any further delay, let's hop back in time to listen to the podcast that Kaylee and I recorded with Matthew back in October 2023.
Welcome back to Performance Process, everybody. Process? What did we decide on, Ronan?
I think we've decided after we've recorded the episode we're about to introduce that we're going to decide what we're going to decide on using. So we haven't yet decided if it's process or process.
We'll put a vote out there to all the listeners whether we want to say process or process, depending, of course, on your accent. But we'll pick one and stick with it going forward. Anyway, we have a great show for you today. We have a fascinating show for you today. Ronan and I have already conducted this interview, so we know just how good it is. Ronan, who are we talking with?
We are chatting to Matthew Hybor, who is head of performance at Jumbo Visma and an absolutely fascinating individual who talks us through everything from the shit days, as he described them, of 2015, where the team won 6 races, right up to today, when obviously the team has won all 3 Grand Tours this season and has 70 odd victories to its name already this year. So absolutely fascinating conversation throughout.
Yeah, he gets into kind of luring Wout van Aert over in the early days, because if you recall, Wout came over before the team was any good. Talked about how kind of their process was a big part of what pulled him in the door and what convinced him to join the program. And you could argue that bringing in a talent like that probably was very helpful in bringing in additional talents too. So, we talked about that. We talked about his involvement in rider training, in sort of the physiology side of things, as well as on the equipment side, how they picked their shoes, for example. Really fascinating chat.
Well, it kind of all comes down to his 3 pillars of performance as he sees it, which are training, equipment, and nutrition, and how his role sees him oversee all 3 of those elements that go into performance, and how he optimizes around each. But also he talks us through the process. I'm going to use your version there, of ensuring that things like wearables, how do they decide if something is actually useful or if it's just another trend. Equipment, how they test equipment before they actually use it in events, how they decided on which shoes to use, how they decide on any equipment, what kind of training interventions they're making, how they're using power versus how he would have used power when he was racing, how nutrition has differed from when he was a pro with Cofidis in the mid-2000s to how the team are doing it today throughout all 3 teams that they have under the Jumbo Visma umbrella.
Plus a whole bunch about altitude training, which I found particularly interesting. Kind of rebuffed a rumor that we had heard, I think, but also shed some light on the level of detail that they are going into to optimize altitude training for each rider.
Not just optimize it, but actually just like prolong the benefits of altitude training, which there was one study I had heard of recently where they had sent a team of scientists to Antarctica, I think, for 6 months at 3,000 meters above sea level or something like that. And within a week or something of coming home, they had lost the benefits. And don't quote me on those numbers; they may not be factually correct. But the lesson or the learning from it was actually it's very difficult to maintain the benefits of being at altitude for any prolonged period. And yet somehow Jumbo seemed to have, I wouldn't say mastered that, but perhaps cracked it in some ways.
At least better than some of the others.
It's seemingly it's no longer a guessing game for Jumbo, but he was a little bit cautious on giving away too much of their performance advantage in certain elements of the conversation, but actually quite surprisingly open and for the vast majority of the conversation you're about to hear.
Yeah, he gave us more than I thought he would. Well, let's drop straight into our interview with Mathieu.
All right, Mathieu Heijboer, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us here today. This is one we've been trying to get together for a while. We initially spoke around the tour and around Jonas's dominant performance in the time trial, and we had an article that followed off the back of that, which was that was just incredibly fascinating. And we have you back here today just to talk all things, well, your role, which is head of performance at Jumbo-Visma. So I'm not even going to attempt to define what your role is. Probably better to throw to you and just give us define the role that you have at Jumbo-Visma and what it is you're in charge of there.
Yeah, so my role is head of performance, which means I'm responsible for everything that has to do with preparing the riders for the big races, for the big events. We have 3 pillars under performance, which is training, which is nutrition, and which is equipment. So those are all my responsibility to make sure riders start with the best training, so in the best shape, with the best nutrition, also with the best equipment to the races. Obviously, I'm not doing it alone. I have a great bunch of people around me. With performance coaches, with nutritionists, with an engineer. So all kinds of expertise are in our performance team. And we're really working together closely to make sure the riders are at their best at the right moment.
And is that just for the men's team, or is that the men's and women's team and across even other sports, or?
Yeah, so my responsibility is for all 3 teams, but in practice, I'm working mostly with a World Tour team. I'm also coaching some of the riders in the World Tour team. But to make sure we all work according to the same philosophy, I have always I'm in contact with the development team as well and with the women's team as well, to make sure we all work according to the same Jumbo-Visma philosophy.
Well, I think, it goes without saying it's been pretty successful, that philosophy, over the past couple of years. Can you give us a bit of an insight into, first of all, how that philosophy has come about, what that philosophy is? Has that evolved down through the years? Because I think it's fair to say, when Rabobank folded over a decade ago, the success wasn't there for a few years through Blanco and Belkin. But recently, with Jumbo's involvement, it seems to be year on year improving. So I guess the question is, what is that philosophy?
Yeah, so I mean, that philosophy has developed over the years, and I think it's very important to start back in 2015, when the first year of Lotto Jumbo started, and where we were a very small team with almost no victories, with very shitty performances, but also a very bad atmosphere and working atmosphere in the whole team. So there were no victories, no performance, no budget. A lot of things weren't good at that time. And then we started first talking about our culture, how are we working together? And it was not only about a training or performance, but it was really about just the people in the team, riders and staff. How were they working together? And from that moment, we started to define our culture, our core values. And also in that development, we started creating a vision on training. How do we want to train? We started thinking about nutrition. We started thinking about equipment. So we all made small steps. Luckily we had some great new riders in the team starting from 2016. And we already were then creating it, or at least trying to create an environment where riders could reach their full potential, although resources were very limited at that time. But then, the team started growing with the success, for example, with Primoz and with Dylan. Then the sponsors, they started growing as well because they wanted to keep the team together. Then we get a little bit more funding, a little bit more opportunities to hire a little bit more people around the riders again. So that philosophy on training, but in fact the philosophy on the whole team about how do we want to act together, how do we want to work together, how do we train. That all went better and better every year. And if you ask me now, look, what's your philosophy? I think the main fundament below our philosophy is that we're trying to do everything together. So we bring a lot of people together, we listen to everyone, and we're trying to make the right program, the right nutrition program, the right equipment together to make it work. So there's not a lot of, let's say, bureaucracy in our team, but really working along the lines with everyone who was giving his input. And even the riders, obviously, to make sure we make plans that are supported by everyone. And then we start working on that plan and try to follow that plan without making a lot of compromises.
I think thinking back to that time, you mentioned 2015, shortly after that, Wout van Aert signed for the team. And at that time, it sort of struck me as a bit of a surprise because the success wasn't with Jumbo-Visma or Lotto Jumbo as it may have been then. And he obviously had the option to go anywhere he liked. Is there, you mentioned budget also. How do you overcome the chicken and egg situation where clearly you've inspired Van Aert to join the squad before the success is there, where easily he could have turned around and said, well, come back to me when you are successful and then I'll consider it.
Yeah. So we made it very clear how we were looking at cycling, how we were looking at performance, and how we were looking at training. And although it's true that it was still a little bit limited in resource and what we could do, at least we could show him that everything we did was built around performance-driven choices. So everything we did, we tried to do it as good as possible, but always with a performance driven approach. It also made it a little bit easier that his coach back at the time was already a Lotto Jumbo coach at that time, Mark Lambert. So he was working with him already since he was very young. So Mark could already show him the way the team was working, and he couldn't lie about it, obviously, because they were so close. So Wout, he already knew that although we were not maybe the biggest team in the world back then, he knew everything he wanted and what he was missing at that time was available in our team. And that was really tempting for him, and that's why he decided to sign with us.
And was there, and I think it's important just to touch on where this team has come from, first of all, before we get into how this year became so successful. And just sort of finally from my point on that was there an organization, be that within cycling or within a different sport, or maybe not even in sport, but some other organization that inspired Jumbo's new approach or Jumbo's new structure that ultimately has led to this success?
Well, the way of building a team and building a strong organization where everybody is feeling responsible for the growth of the team, that was really inspired by the book Legacy about the All Blacks. So that's a big inspiration for especially Richard Plugge and Marijn Zeeman, who were really the founders of the new team. And then what I, for example, did, I had a lot of talks with Jack Ory, who was the speed skating coach of the Lotto Jumbo speed skating team, because we were one team speed skating department, which is very popular in the Netherlands and cycling. Well, he also gave me a lot of insights in how he built up his speed skating team. He was already very successful back then already with a lot of Olympic gold medals, and he still is. Those were some of the examples that I just went to other successful coaches to listen to, and to how to build like a performance-driven structure around the athlete to make sure they reach the full potential.
You've chosen a bad week to mention the All Blacks there, being an Irishman, having been knocked out of the World Cup by by the All Blacks. But actually, maybe that's also where I've gone wrong, is I've only got about halfway through that book, so I need to come back to it all of these years later and finish it maybe. I think you mentioned there your 3 pillars: training, nutrition, and equipment. And fast forward to today, I think it'd be interesting to jump into each of those. Probably starting with training is probably the best place to start. You mentioned you're head of performance. You have a coaching team below you, but you're also coaching some of the riders on a daily basis. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But in fact, the way we see it is we have like a Jumbo-Visma performance team helping the riders to reach their full potential. So one of my roles is to write some of the riders' personal training programs, but I cannot do that without the input of our nutritionist, without the input of our embedded scientist, or our data analyst. So, in conservative or conventional cycling, it's like coaches are really seen as like a private coach who is driving a rider to their best. But we really see it like riders are coached here by a Jumbo-Visma performance coach, which obviously they are connected. So we have 4 performance coaches now, although unfortunately one of them left shortly a while ago. But they are coaching 5 to 8 riders, and we try to match the character. But in the end, we're all working along the same philosophy. So that means whenever someone is leaving the team, we try to find another performance coach, and we onboard him on our philosophy. And that means every rider knows exactly how we train and how they should be trained. And obviously there's always room for individual customization because there are different types of riders, obviously. But in general, the way of working, it's the Jumbo-Visma way of working. And I think that separates us from a lot of other teams.
I think that is very different in that we hear a lot of other teams, or a lot of other riders at other teams, have individual and private coaches that they work with.
Yeah.
And there's maybe pros and cons to both approach, but like the Jumbo-Visma approach there, it sounds like you've got, if I'm hearing you correctly, a coach in the traditional sense of the term. You've also got maybe a nutritionist, maybe an aerodynamicist, maybe a bike fitter, maybe a doctor, maybe, I don't know all the different roles, but they're all feeding into the coach who then sets a program based on all that information rather than based on what he or she has done in the past that worked for other athletes. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's true. So we have a lot of communication together. We have a lot of meetings together to update everyone about the status of riders. So I also, although Jonas is not, for example, a rider I directly coach, I'm 100% aware of what he's doing, why he's doing it. And I'm also giving Tim Heemskerk, who's my colleague, a lot of input on his program, while he is also giving me a lot of input on the program I write, for example, for Sepp Kuss. So, there's definitely not private coaches, but it's really about Jumbo-Visma coaching the riders.
And may seem like a silly question in 2023, but I presume power meters play a big part in that. I guess first of all, is that are power meters the gold standard in terms of your training there, or is there still a lot of room for? And I guess that goes beyond parameters, but just in terms of training load, training stimulus, training prescription, is it watts, or is there more to it than that?
No, there's more to it. So obviously, there's a lot of parameters to be measured and to be monitored every day. But we never try to lose out of sight that it's about the basics. And the basics is about just having a good contact with your rider. Listen very carefully to what he's saying. Is a training perceived as hard or maybe not really hard? Did you want to have to train him hard, or did you want to train it to be easy? So it starts always with a very good, just human relationship and human contact. And I think that's the solid basis under the coach-rider connection. And obviously, besides to that, there's a lot of parameters to be measured: watts, pulse in the morning, maybe HRV, etc. But we define our choices or our decisions mostly just on the direct contact or the direct relationship with the rider.
brief interlude here. Can we define HRV, please? Just acronym soup.
Yes, HRV stands for heart rate variability, which is the variation in time intervals between successive heartbeats. It's not the same as heart rate, which simply measures the number of heartbeats per minute. HRV, on the other hand, examines the fluctuations in time between each heartbeat, which can provide insights into autonomic nervous systems activity. And you'll have seen it pop up on your Whoop if you have one. Your Garmin devices may also show it. iAthlete or iAthlete, I think, were one of the first to provide like an app that you can measure HRV with, and some use it to prescribe training and assess how recovered or not recovered an athlete may be, and if they're ready to train or not.
Yeah, it's like the basis of the Whoop score thing. The Whoop score being, even if you don't have a Whoop, if you watch any bike racing, you have seen the Whoop scores pop up. Like they sponsored Tour de France coverage in the US, at least in the last year or two. So you probably saw Whoop scores pop up from some of the EF riders. That's basically what we're talking about. Anyway, that's just what HRV is. We're going to try on this podcast. When there is an acronym that we think maybe a lot of our audience is not familiar with, we'll just stop like this and tell you what it is. Let's get back to the chat. You mentioned data analysts before as one of the members of the team. I'm interested to hear what that individual is analyzing. Like, what is it? Are they analyzing power data? Are they analyzing what are they taking a look at, and what are you getting out of it?
Yeah, it's a pretty new role in the team. But what he's doing mostly is making race analysis. Looking at the power output at some points in the race. Obviously, back in 2015, 2016, winning a Grand Tour was far out of reach. So we had to more or less a little bit calculate, okay, what is needed to win a Grand Tour. Now we have the benchmarks in our team, so which is very useful because we can use that benchmark already to develop the young guys from the development team, to show them, look, if you want to win the Tour de France in the future, you have to be able to do this, this, and this. And our data analyst is really, going down in all those numbers and also teaching us, and I mean us, the other members of the performance team, to what is needed to win the big races and why we maybe weren't succeeding at some races and why we were. So that is one part of his job. And obviously another part is also the scouting process. So looking for new riders to strengthen our team, looking at power profiles, looking at race results, etc.
Was that born out of, like, if I just look around my room here now, I've got core temperature sensors, hydration, sweat monitors. I've got sleep trackers, 2 different sleep trackers, heart rate monitor, HRV. There's a wearable for everything these days. We almost need a wearable to keep track of all the different wearables that we have. Is that part of the data analyst's role? Is that maybe where it evolved from, and making sense of that?
Incidentally, yes. So if we think there's something to gain, we could do that with a rider. We're not doing it like for the complete team with everyone. But the big danger with all those variables and all those data that's coming in is that you lose the human contact. And we still think do the basics right and focus on the basics again. That's most important here. So it can help us a lot, all those variables and all those information sources. Yeah, like I just mentioned, we always try to keep each other on the right track, and the right track is doing the basics right, and use those variables only as an helping thing, but not use that as our direction to go to.
Okay, folks, that's where we're cutting off the free version of this podcast this week. Just a reminder, if you head over to escapecollective.com/member, you can sign up now and you can get the entire podcast uninterrupted. You'll not have me butting in to cut you off or to remind you that you're not yet a member. And in doing so, you will be helping to ensure this podcast continues for many more episodes and months and years to come. So head over escapecollective.com/member now to sign up to Escape Collective and to get the entire episode of Performance Process, along with all of the other podcasts and written content that we publish on our website.